"Please take me, I can cook, I can bear you children too," she whispered at the lonely old cowboy's ranch. Wyoming Territory, spring, 1887. The wind swept through the open plains, carrying the dust and grit of a hard country toward the heart of a settlement swollen with trade and lawlessness. It was Spring Market in Rawbone, a frontier town known more for its tolerance of whiskey and whoring than for any legitimate commerce. Merchants hollered over barrels of tobacco, tools, and livestock, while pickpockets and gamblers moved through the crowd like ghosts. The scent of sweat, blood, and unwashed bodies clung to every breeze. Somewhere beyond the main square, muffled by the louder trade of cattle and guns, was the back alley tent known only by whispers, the livery of flesh. Silas Carter rode into town not for drink or company, but for a stud horse he had heard would be auctioned. He was 53, gaunt but sturdy, with a face carved by years under the sun and eyes dark enough to quiet a saloon. 16 years ago he had buried his wife beneath a cottonwood tree on land no one else wanted, and since then he had spoken little and smiled less. Folks called him a ghost on horseback. That suited him fine. He tied his mare near the edge of the square, adjusted his battered hat, and moved through the crowd like a shadow. The livery tent was not on his list. He had no business there, no use for women anymore, least of all those being sold like mules. But the sound of the auctioneer's voice cut through the buzz like a knife. Virgin blood, knows her way around a stove, pretty enough to draw breath, opening bid $10. Silas paused. It was not curiosity that made him stop, but something colder, habit maybe. He turned his head slightly. Through the torn canvas flaps, he saw girls, no, children in some cases, lined up like broken dolls. Dirty dresses, hollow eyes. Hands bound in front, not by rope, but by fear. Then came the voice. "Please, take me, I can cook. I can bear you children too," she whispered, not to the crowd, but to the only man who looked like he might listen. Silas did not blink. He turned fully now, stepping closer to the flap. His gaze found hers instantly. She was young, 20, maybe 21, but her eyes were older than time. Big, brown, and steady despite the tremble in her lower lip. She did not cry. She did not plead. She simply looked at him the way no one had looked at him in years, not with disgust, not with want, but with recognition. He saw her, and she saw something in him too, maybe not safety, but something less cruel than what surrounded her. "Look at that one," the auctioneer smirked. "Already knows her worth, got fire in her belly, this one. What'll it be, gentlemen? 10? 12? 20, Silas said. The tent fell quiet. The auctioneer squinted. "Did you say 20? The man laughed nervously. "That is double opening, mister. You sure about that?" Silas said nothing more. He stepped forward, laid 2 crumpled $10 notes on the makeshift table, and looked once more at the girl. "Untie her," he said. One of the handlers hesitated. "I said, untie her." The man obeyed. She stumbled once when her arms dropped free, then steadied. Silas turned without offering his hand. He walked out into the daylight, not looking back. She followed, barefoot and thin as a whisper. The crowd murmured. A few chuckled. One man spat. Silas said nothing. He untied his mare, mounted, then reached down and pulled her up behind him without a word. She wrapped her arms around his waist, tentatively at first, then tighter, as though she feared the world might split open if she let go. They rode away from Rawbone as the market roared behind them. Neither spoke for a long time. Only the wind and the occasional groan of saddle leather filled the silence. But somewhere between the bones of her fingers and the hollow of his back, something began to stir, like the faint crackle of kindling before a fire. Something not yet hope, but not despair either. The ride stretched across hours in silence. The sun had slipped behind a curtain of iron-gray clouds, casting long shadows over the dry Wyoming plains. The air turned cold, sharp, smelling of sage and distance. The girl, Lena he guessed, though she had not yet offered her name, clung to Silas with a tension that did not fade, even as the road softened beneath the hooves of his mare. She finally spoke when the trees began to thin and the outline of the distant hills gave way to a barren flat. "What are you going to do with me?" Her voice was small but steady, the kind of voice that had asked too many dangerous questions in its lifetime and knew not all of them found answers. Silas did not turn his head. His voice was quiet, the same tone he used to calm a spooked horse. "I did not buy you to do anything with you. I just did not want you to belong to them." She said nothing. He felt her arms loosen slightly, not from comfort, but exhaustion. She had likely not eaten in a day, maybe more. As dusk deepened, his cabin appeared like a bruise against the horizon, low, square, and half swallowed by dry grass. It was the kind of place only a man like Silas would live in. Practical, lonely, nothing more than what was necessary to keep breathing. He dismounted, tied the mare, and reached a hand up. She hesitated, then let him help her down. She was lighter than she looked. The porch creaked under their weight. He opened the door, stepping aside without a word. She entered cautiously, eyes darting to every corner like a stray animal, unsure if the trap had sprung. The room was plain. Wooden walls, a rough table, one chair, a narrow bed against the far wall. A small stove in the corner crackled with heat. On the table sat 2 tin bowls, a loaf of bread wrapped in a cloth, and a pot of beans warming by the fire. He did not speak. He removed his coat, hung it on the peg, then moved toward the stove. She did not sit. She stood near the door, arms crossed tightly, bare feet stiff on the wooden floor. "I made enough," he said. Still no answer. Silas reached for a second blanket, thick and woolen, folded neatly on the rocker beside the hearth. He tossed it over the edge of the bed. "The fire stays lit all night. You take the bed. I'll be out in the barn if you prefer space." She stared at him. Her eyes searched for something in his face, intention, deceit, some sign of the danger she had grown used to. But there was nothing in him but tired kindness, buried beneath the wear of years. He turned to leave, but before he reached the door he paused. He did not know why he said it, not fully. Perhaps because it needed saying, perhaps because it was the only way to give her more than safety. "The stove is hot not because I am cold," he said quietly, eyes on the flames, "but because I did not want you to think the world is cold too." He stepped out into the wind. Inside, Lena remained still for several minutes. Then she approached the fire, touched the edge of the blanket, and sat in the chair he had left empty. She picked up one of the bowls. It was not fancy food, beans, some overcooked pork, but it was warm. Her hands trembled as she lifted the spoon. She did not cry. She just ate, in silence, staring at the door long after he was gone, trying to remember the last time someone had prepared a meal for her without expectation, and finding, to her surprise, that she could not remember at all. The days passed without rhythm or question. Lena woke each morning to the sound of Silas splitting wood or the low snort of horses in the barn. He never locked the door. He never told her where she could or could not go. And most of all, he never touched her. That, more than anything, unsettled her. She had grown used to men reaching, grabbing, taking, even in the places that pretended to protect her, even in the shadows of churches. This man, silent, stern, heavy with age and dust, kept more distance from her than walls ever had. He slept in the barn for 3 nights. Each evening she found a bowl of stew or beans already on the table, the fire hot, the blanket fluffed beside the bed. She would eat, curl up in the blanket, and fall into the kind of dreamless sleep only the exhausted can claim. On the 4th day, she swept the floor. No one asked her to. Dust gathered thick at the corners, and cobwebs claimed the windows. She wiped each sill, washed the bowls, and folded the spare blanket into perfect thirds. She found a basket of old clothes in the corner, his, and one shirt with a ripped sleeve. She threaded a needle and began to mend. That night, she waited. When Silas stepped through the door, he paused. The place smelled clean. A loaf of cornbread sat cooling beside the stove, and something warm simmered in a pot. The table had been wiped. There were 2 bowls. He removed his coat without a word, hung it on the peg, sat down. Lena ladled soup into both bowls, then retreated to the far corner, where she picked up her own spoon and ate in silence, knees drawn to her chest. Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood. He took his own bowl and walked over, dragging the other chair behind him. It scraped softly against the floor. He sat down beside her, and held out the ladle. "Someone who knows how to cook," he said, "ought to eat beside someone who knows how to appreciate it." She stared at him. Slowly, she lowered her spoon. She was not sure if it was kindness or habit or something else, but it did not feel like a threat. She nodded. They ate the rest of the meal side by side. Not a word passed between them. But when she stood to clear the bowls, she looked at him with something lighter than fear. The next morning, she asked about flour. He pointed to the tin bin near the pantry. By sundown, the cabin smelled of cornmeal and wood smoke. She baked flat rounds of bread, brown at the edges, soft in the center. He took one, broke it in half, and chewed slowly, like it was the first solid thing he had eaten in years. "Good," he said simply. She smiled, barely, but it reached her eyes. That night, while rummaging for more cloth to mend, Lena found a box tucked under the edge of the bed, wooden, plain, old. Inside were small keepsakes, a broken pocket watch, a handkerchief with embroidered initials, and a cooking spoon with its handle cracked in two. The spoon had once belonged to someone else. She did not ask. She just took it quietly, whittled the handle smooth again, and reinforced it with a piece of wire and cloth. The next morning, she left it on the table beside his coffee cup. Silas stared at it a long time. He did not ask where she found it. He did not speak. That afternoon, he rode into town. When he returned, he placed a small package wrapped in brown paper beside the flour bin. Inside, 3 spools of thread, white, gray, and red, and a new sewing needle. It took a couple of minutes for Nancy to realize that Luke was keeping us. He also added 2 more logs to the fire, though the air had warmed. Lena said nothing. She just sat on the floor that evening, her back against the wall, watching the flames move, feeling the weight of something unnamed settle gently between them. Not love, not yet, but it was no longer silence either. It was nearing dusk when the man appeared, his horse trailing dust down the narrow trail that led to Silas's land. Lena saw him first, just a glint of silver from his belt buckle catching the sun, the swagger of his ride too relaxed for a man with good intentions. She froze at the sight of him and took 2 steps back from the porch. Silas emerged from the barn, wiping his hands with a rag, his revolver not on his hip but never far. He did not speak as the rider slowed to a halt and dismounted with a crooked grin. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, his voice slick as grease. "Silas Carter. Still alive and kicking. Thought you'd drunk yourself to death years ago." Silas stayed quiet, but his eyes sharpened. The man's gaze slid over to Lena, who was halfway behind the door now. "You remember me, sweetheart?" he said. "I sure remember you. You gave me a hell of a look that day. Lot of fire in you. Still got it, I see." Lena's hands clenched at her sides. "Enough," Silas said. The man turned, mock offended. "Easy now, just saying hello to the girl you paid good money for. What was it, $20? Bit rich for a used gun like you. I thought you were out of the game." He smiled, wider, cruel. "Guess even you got a taste for fresh stock, huh?" Silas stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was low and clear as a cut of ice. "I used to shoot men for money," he said. "Never bought a soul. And she's the first person in years who looked at me like I was still worth something. She chose me. I chose to listen." The man's smirk faltered. "I suggest you get back on that horse before you say something else you'll regret." They stared at each other, silent, stretching long and tight. The man spat near Silas's boots. "This ain't over." He mounted, turned his horse, and rode off, but not fast enough to be called retreat. Lena watched him disappear into the trees, her shoulders still tense even after he was gone. Silas did not speak. He stood at the edge of the porch, staring into the distance. That night, Lena made stew, but neither of them ate much. Later, while the fire cracked low, she sat at the table, running her fingers over the edge of a chipped cup. "My mother," she said softly, "was half Navajo. Never knew her people. Her father, white trader, never came back. She raised me near Fort Bowie in a mission house. When she got sick, she told me to find her kin up in Montana." Silas leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "She told me not to be ashamed," Lena continued. "But they all looked at me like I was dirt. Not enough of one thing to be claimed by either side." He stared into the fire for a long while. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Out here, nobody gives a damn what color your blood is. Only thing that matters is whether you stand or run when it counts." She blinked, eyes burning from more than the smoke. "And you?" she asked. "You ever run?" Silas didn't flinch. "Once," he said, "and I buried her 6 months later." He stood, picked up the kettle, and poured water into the tin basin. Lena watched his hands, rough, steady, but not cruel. "I ain't planning on running again," he added, his voice low, and she believed him. Not because he promised anything, but because he did not try to make himself look better than he was, because he let her see the cracks and offered no excuse for them. That night, she stayed up long after he had gone to the barn, watching the shadows move across the wooden walls, trying to understand how a man could still be dangerous without being unkind, and wondering if maybe, just maybe, she was safer here than she had ever been anywhere else. The scream was sharp, brief, and strangled. Silas heard it through the thin wood walls just before dawn, followed by the muffled sound of someone sitting up too fast and gasping for air. He pushed open the cabin door without knocking. Lena was curled in a tight knot on the bed, her arms wrapped around her knees, breath coming in fast, uneven gulps. Her eyes were wide, but not with present fear. They were caught somewhere else, somewhere she could not yet escape. He stepped inside slowly, not speaking. She flinched when she noticed him, then blinked twice and lowered her head, as if ashamed of the noise. "I'm sorry," she whispered hoarsely. "It was just a dream." He stood beside the bed, the firelight casting soft shadows along his face. For a moment he said nothing. Then, gently, he reached out and laid one hand on her shoulder. It was the first time he had touched her. She stiffened, but did not pull away. His palm was rough, warm, firm, without pressure. Her breathing slowed. The room settled around them like dust. "You were not alone in it," he said quietly. She looked up. "My wife," he said, "used to dream like that. Not always scream, sometimes just silence, but it scared her more. Said the silence reminded her of what it cost to survive." Lena swallowed hard. She wanted to ask what his wife had survived, but the question stayed buried. Silas walked over to the chair, sat down, and stared into the fire. "She once told me," he said slowly, "that I knew how to live for my gun, but not for anyone else." His voice did not tremble, but there was a hollow space beneath the words. "I kept her safe. I paid for land. I put food on the table. But when she got sick," he paused, "I had no idea how to fight something I could not shoot, and she knew it." Lena drew the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You loved her," she said. "I did," he answered, "but I did not know how to make her feel it." Silence hung between them for a long moment, broken only by the low pop of burning wood. Lena turned to him then. Her eyes were tired, but steady. "If I were your wife," she asked softly, "would you live for me?" Silas did not respond right away. He looked down at his hands, the ones that had gripped pistols and reins and shovels, but never the fragile pieces of another human's trust. Not truly. He stood. He walked to the cupboard, opened it. From the back shelf, he pulled out an old shirt, gray, fraying at the cuffs, the stitching thin and loose. The fabric once belonged to someone who had worn it in the mornings while brewing coffee, someone who laughed without fear of what came next. He sat back down, took a knife from the table, and slowly, without explanation, began to cut the shirt into long, careful strips. Lena watched, eyes wide and silent. He folded one piece in half, then again, whittled the edge, took the thread she had been using days before and began to stitch a seam. He was not skilled with a needle, but his hands were patient. He worked for several minutes in silence. When he finished, he held out the piece, rough but warm, a scarf, a shawl, something between them. "For the mornings," he said. He did not look at her. She took it in both hands, fingers tracing the seams, feeling the softness of cloth worn by another woman's life and now shaped by his hands. She wanted to speak, but instead she stood, stepped closer, and sat down beside him. The fire warmed them both. No more words were needed. The night air was sharp with dust and sagebrush. Stars hung low over the prairie, cold and unblinking. Lena stood by the window, breath caught in her throat, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the barn. They were coming. Silas had known it before she had. He saw the fresh tracks near the creek bed, heard the clean snap of twigs that did not belong to wind. Men like that did not forget a challenge. or a loss. He sat at the table, cleaning his revolver slowly. The fire cracked low, throwing long shadows. "I sent word to the county marshal," he said. "Names, locations, what I saw, what I know." Lena's hands clenched. "Do you think they'll come? Maybe. Maybe not." He reassembled the gun and placed it on the table, then handed her a rifle from the wall. "I've never shot anyone," she said. "You might not have to, but you should know how." From the cupboard he pulled a small bag, a rolled map, compass, jerky, water, money, and oilskin. He laid it next to the revolver. "If this ends wrong," he said quietly, "take the gray mare. Ride north. Trails rough, but safe. Horses packed and ready." "You planned to send me away," she whispered. "I planned for you to live." The knock came just before midnight. Hard, flat, final. Silas opened the door slowly. The man from the market stood there, coat open to reveal a pistol. Beside him, a younger man, all twitching fingers and sharp eyes. "You took something that ain't yours," the older man said. "I took what you never owned," Silas replied. "We came for her." "She's not here," he lied. The younger man stepped forward. "That so? You sure you want this to go down ugly?" Silas placed the revolver on the table. "I'm sure you should turn around." The man smirked. Then everything happened at once. Gun drawn. Flash of silver. A shot fired. Silas dove sideways, the bullet grazing his shoulder. He fired once, sharp and clean. The young man staggered, groaned, and collapsed. The older man reached for his weapon. A second shot cracked from the shadows behind the door. The bullet hit the beam above his head, wood splintering inches above him. Lena stepped out, rifle steady in her hands, though they trembled. "Do it," she said. "Move one more inch and I will put the next one in your chest." He froze. Slowly he lowered his hand. Silas stood, gripping his bleeding arm. The man looked from Lena, no longer the trembling girl from the tent, but something feral and fierce, to Silas, bleeding but unshaken, and he realized, maybe for the first time, that they were not afraid. That made him afraid. Before he could speak, the sound of hooves rolled across the ridge. 5 riders, lanterns bobbing, coats marked with the marshal seal. The man cursed and dropped his weapon. By dawn, he and his partner were in cuffs. His ledgers, contracts, and the last remains of his trade burned in the field. The marshal tipped his hat as he left. Silas and Lena stood in the doorway, watching the sky begin to lighten. He looked at her, blood still wet on his sleeve. "You missed on purpose?" he said. She shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "I aimed exactly where I meant to." She looked down at her trembling hands. "But I would not miss again." And he believed her. Silas healed slower than he would have liked. The wound to his shoulder, though not deep, pulled tight whenever he reached too far or twisted too quick. Still, it was not the pain that troubled him. It was the stillness. He was not used to being looked after. Lena refused to let him lift a thing. She boiled clean rags in water, pressed herbs to the bruise, changed his bandage each morning, with hands that were gentle but never timid. She scolded him softly when he tried to feed the horses. He obeyed, not out of weakness, but something closer to gratitude. Each day she cooked and cleaned. But it was not the same as before. There was no sense of obligation in it now, no wariness. Her movements were calm, measured, and her presence had settled into the house like a familiar breeze. One evening, after a supper of potatoes and beans, they sat together at the table, not across from each other, but side by side. The lantern light danced over the wooden walls, and the silence between them no longer felt like distance. Lena sipped slowly from her tin cup. Then, without looking at him, she spoke. "If you want me to go, I'll go," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "You've given me more than most ever would. A place, a name, safety." She paused. "But if you're keeping me here just because I can cook or sew or fetch water, then I will leave in the morning." Silas did not respond right away. She turned her face toward him. "But if you're keeping me because you want me, because you feel something for me, then say so. Because I'm tired of living in a house where I don't know whether I belong." Her words did not tremble. They simply sat there, like a stone placed gently on the table, unmovable and true. Silas stood without a word. He walked to the old dresser in the corner, the one with the drawer that had not been opened in years. His fingers moved slowly, almost reverently, as he pulled it open and reached inside. He came back to the table and set something small and circular down beside her bowl. A ring, simple, dull with age, the metal worn soft around the edges. He did not explain it, did not touch her hand or ask for hers. He simply left it there, like a bridge left half-built, waiting. Then he stepped outside into the dark, letting the door creak closed behind him. Lena stared at the ring. She did not cry. Instead, she picked it up, turned it in her fingers. On the inside of the band was a faint engraving, barely legible now from time and wear. She traced the curve of the original letter, an old initial that belonged to another woman. She could have felt threatened by it, jealous even, but she did not, because she knew something had changed. The next morning, while she was folding linens, she heard the rhythmic scrape of metal against wood. She peeked through the half-open barn door. Silas sat at the workbench, hunched over the ring. In his hand was his hunting knife. He moved carefully, slowly, carving something into the inside of the band, the curve of a letter. She did not say a word, did not interrupt. Later, when she found the ring resting on the windowsill in a shaft of light, she turned it over. The old letter was still there, but beside it, freshly carved and delicate, was a new one. She smiled then, a small, quiet smile. And this time, she slipped the ring on her finger, without waiting for him to ask. Spring returned to Rawbone, late, dusty, and just wild enough. The mountains still wore snow, but the town square bloomed with wagons, music, and the noisy rhythm of frontier life. At the center of it all, the smell of roasted vegetables and fresh cornbread drifted from a long table beneath a striped awning. Lena stood behind the pots, apron dusted with flour, cheeks warm from the heat. Her smile came quick now, easier than before. Around her, children and neighbors bustled, serving, eating, laughing. Silas Carter stood nearby, quieter but different. He poured water for the elderly, passed bread to barefoot boys, and knelt when small hands tugged at his coat, asking about horses. He no longer walked through crowds like a ghost. Ever since she married him, muttered the old neighbor woman, he's been smiling. Thought it'd crack his face. Lena laughed. Silas heard her, and gave the woman a look, half warning, half amused. I think it suits him, Lena said, ladling out stew. A little girl tugged at her skirt. Miss Lena, she asked with wide eyes, did you marry him 'cause he's handsome? Lena knelt. No, she said gently. I married him because he was the first man who didn't look at me like something to buy. The girl nodded, even if she didn't understand. As the sun dropped and lanterns lit the square, Silas joined Lena on a bench. They sat side by side, watching traders laugh, lovers walk, life unfold. Lena leaned against him. Can I ask you something? He nodded. She looked out over the warm light, the gathered town. Why did you choose me? That day in the tent, Silas was quiet for a while. Then he said, because you didn't just choose to live. You chose me. He reached for her hand, and I came back to life the moment you did. She closed her eyes, leaning into him as the market moved gently around them. Years passed like wind over grass. In a quiet kitchen beneath the same cottonwood tree, where Silas's past once lay buried, Lena sat peeling apples beside a girl with curious eyes, her daughter. Tell me again, the girl said, how you met Papa. Lena smiled and handed her another apple. Hemed to town looking for a horse, she said, and I was being sold like one. But you stayed? The girl asked, frowning. I did, Lena said, because when everyone else saw something broken, he saw someone brave. She reached across the table, took her daughter's hands. And when I chose him, I wasn't just choosing to live, she said. I was choosing to be loved. Then she whispered the words that had never left her, told me, you didn't choose to survive, you chose me, and I came back to life the moment you did. Outside, the prairie wind stirred the cottonwood leaves, and the past and future moved together like a song. And so, in a land where justice rode slow and love rode faster, two hearts found a place to rest, not because they were perfect, but because they chose each other when no one else did. In the dust and danger of the old American frontier, that kind of love was the rarest kind of all.